10 years ago, voters in the UK made a decision that reshaped not just the United Kingdom, but politics around the world. Brexit was sold as a way to restore sovereignty, control immigration, and unleash economic growth. But our next guest says it was, quote, a remarkable howl of self-defiance that was also an act of economic self-harm.
Adrian Wooldridge is a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. His latest piece for Bloomberg Weekend, co-written with Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, is The Day That Changed the World. Adrian joins us now in New York. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's go back to that howl and how it's echoed around the world in the decade since. But we should start by saying this was wholly unexpected. And you point this out in the piece, that there was a lot of interest in the Brexit referendum, what might happen. Of course, politicians talked about it in the lead up to it, but I think the world was largely surprised that it came out the way that it did.
Well, it was unexpected in two ways. One, it was unexpected by the vast media sort of blob. People like me who covered
Mea culpa.
Yeah, I was going to say, of which we are guilty members, yes.
We did not expect it at all.
Yeah.
Partly because most of us live in London, and that was a sort of big centre of Remain, but partly we didn't sort of get to the north and talk to people up there enough, that the north being the big driver of that vote. But secondly, it was unexpected by the people who actually campaigned for it. And the look on the face of Boris Johnson and Michael Gove when they were told that they'd actually won was a look actually of horror, because they thought, actually, we've got to start running the country now, and we don't know what we're going to do.
I mean, the other political surprise is that it was put on as a referendum in the first place, that it was put up to the voters. Talk to us about how that decision came about and the fallout from that happening.
Well, the decision was a decision of party management. The big faction within the Conservative Party had been arguing very strongly that they needed a referendum. And in particular, a man called Jimmy Goldsmith created something called the Referendum Party. He was an eccentric billionaire, very successful businessman, but, you know, he lived in France, he lived in Mexico, he lived sort of everywhere apart from Britain, as far as I can see. And he created this thing called the Referendum Party, which stood in elections, particularly against Tory candidates. And he really frightened a lot of these Tory candidates. And these candidates started arguing, saying, we need to have a referendum. And David Cameron listened to this and said, actually, they're not going to win. Give them the referendum.
He thought this would put it to bed.
He thought it would put it to bed. He thought it was a tool of party management, and in fact it was a tool of party destruction.
The economic ramifications were apparent pretty early on, if I remember right. This was going to be deleterious to the British economy, and yet it continued, and here we are today. As you look back on the last 10 years and the state of the UK economy today, directly attributable to what happened a decade ago?
Well, there are two complicated things. One is that there were people who argued that it would be good for the British economy.
I see.
They argued that it would be because it would free us to do what we wanted to do. We're a global trading nation. Europe has got big productivity problems. You know, we could be the Singapore on Thames. That was the argument that was presented by some Brexiteers. And some possibility that wasn't completely foolish. But what happens with two things? One was that they didn't really come in with a coherent plan of how to deliver those gains. And the second was the sort of world that Brexit created, which was a world of increasingly divided trading blocs, was exactly the worst sort of world for a free trading Britain to survive in. So they sort of shot their own goose, as it were.
One of those big motivators, I mean, there are huge parallels here with what happened in the US a couple years later.
Absolutely.
Obviously, we didn't learn our lesson here, even after watching Brexit. One of the big motivators for those people in the North and folks that you say didn't get spoken to enough before this vote was immigration. And one of the interesting things that has happened is we do have a graph for those of us who can see. Our radio listeners, I'll walk you through it. But it shows a big spike in immigration after Brexit.
Absolutely.
Why are you seeing that, and what does that mean?
Well, there are two things that happen. It happened with immigration after Brexit. One is that it spikes. It actually goes up rather than going down.
Yeah.
And the second is it becomes browner. That before Brexit, a lot of the immigrants came from Europe. After Brexit, fewer and fewer come from Europe because the free market people, the visa issues, and more come from the Commonwealth. So if you voted for Brexit, hoping for a whiter country, essentially, which some people did, you got very disappointed. If you voted for Brexit hoping for immigration control, you were also frustrated. So in some ways, the winners from Brexit turned out to be, in the long term, the losers. Why did that big surge in immigration happen? It happened partly because of COVID, and COVID created a lot of demand for labour, particularly in care homes and particularly in the National Health Service, and that labour is much more easily acquired from the Commonwealth countries than it is domestically. But secondly, that there were two groups of Brexiteers. One was the group of Little Englanders who wanted to restrict immigration, but the other was the group of globalists who said, well, Europe is this protectionist zone. We want a global Britain, and a global Britain means free trade in goods, it means free trade in money, but it also means free trade in people. It means more immigration. And Boris Johnson, who was the leader of that wing of the Brexit movement, became Prime Minister and implemented his plan of more immigration, which is now referred to as the Boris wave.
Regular readers of yours, I count myself among them, know that you like to think about history and historical sweep, and here we are 10 years out, a very small amount of time in the grand sweep of history. Do you see a world in which the UK is reintegrated into Europe in the way that it once was? How do you see this playing out in not the years to come, the decades to come, the centuries to come?
A very, very difficult question. I think there is now such doubt on the European continent about Britain. They're always a bit worried that Britain was a bit odd, an island nation and the rest of it. But I don't think Europe will really rush to readmit the British on the old terms because they think, well, they might leave again. It's very, very close thing. Secondly, in order to join the European Union, we'd have to join the euro. We were in a rather good position in the past that we were sort of a member but not a member.
Always an interesting deal.
We had a very good
annoying
deal
for those of us trying to travel and convert our pound. Also, the pound was always worth more than the dollar or the euro. But
But now they would say, well, you have to join much more on our terms. You have to accept the euro. You had all sorts of opt-outs under the old deal. You're not going to get those this time round. So I think if it comes to practice, we may move towards a world in which we revolve a bit more closely with Europe, particularly when it comes to defence, perhaps when it comes to trading. But I don't see the old, what I thought was actually rather a good deal that Britain had, being recreated.